welcome back. We're still talking about commodities, especially from the agricultural space. And let's see a little bit of what Nigeria has been doing when it comes to agriculture. And then, of course, we'll see what the agro-industry is feeding off from that. Some of the potential that Nigeria has in the agricultural space is that Nigeria is the world's largest producer of cassava, accounting for about 20% of global production. Yes, world's largest. And the livestock population in Nigeria includes 76 million goats, 43.4 million sheep, cattle, 18.4, poultry, 180 million. Nigeria is the largest fish consumer in Africa, with an annual consumption of about 3.2 million metric tons. As of 2023, agricultural imports were valued at $6.6 billion. The scarce effects that we're looking for, that's where it goes to, while exports were at 2.3 billion. Local rice production only meets about 57% of domestic demand, in spite of the efforts of the governments closing the borders and all of that. Estimated 33.1 million people projected to face high levels of acute food insecurity this year, unfortunately, in spite of all of this wealth. And less than 5% of bank credit is granted to the agricultural sector due to its perceived high risk. We're still waiting for the recapitalization, or what's the word now, for the Bank of Agriculture, which we're supposed to see. That's supposed to help us empower more people. However, in spite of all these challenges or not, so we've seen Ellah PLC make some very big strides, especially in recent times. Tolaram is the latest one that they did, and they've been in the news. We have the Managing Director and Chief Executive Officer of Ellah right here, Mr. Chuka Modi. Mr. Modi, good morning and welcome to the program.
Thank you very much.
I guess I should start by saying congratulations. That's a big and bold move that you have done. And of course, expectations are high about what this will do to the agricultural space, especially adding value. This is the agro-industrial. So tell us how your experience has been like, especially in this administration. I don't know if you had the projection of how many millions of Nigerians could lose food or not have food this year, and yet we have so much potentials, which I believe has been an attraction for you playing in the agricultural sector. So what has your experience been like, and especially since you're able to make this kind of big move?
I mean, look, everyone has potential, right? It's about how you exploit the potential and the circumstances which you're in. I think with the case of Nigeria, there are externalities and the general macro environment that dictates what can be done. It's difficult for smallholders to borrow simply because they don't have the nature of collateral banks require. Banks find it difficult to lend also because there's the risk matrix they employ, which makes it difficult to lend into the sector. With inflation at 23%, it's difficult or impossible to lend to anyone at less than 23% because that's the cost of money effectively. And unless you have government intervention in a variety of ways, the anchor borrower scheme, the central bank borrowing programs, it's very difficult for your bank to intervene in a sector. So I think there are a variety of challenges in the space that one has to navigate in trying to grow in the agri sector. But in spite of that, I mean, we're trying to do our best to expand because it's a lucrative space. People have to eat. The population is growing. So I think that there are a lot of opportunities. It's a function of how one exploits these particular opportunities.
So, I mean, you are able to forge ahead in spite of these difficulties. And we see, as you said, anybody can have potentials. Perhaps there are areas you see that people are missing out when it comes to exploring some of these potentials which the country has.
I mean, the agricultural space, the agribusiness space is a large, varied space. It's very significant in terms of our GDP and our economy. We're focusing, our focus is fairly narrow. We focus on oil palm, cassava, and we're doing livestock, cattle, and pork. Those are only 4 different income streams we have, but I think it's important to focus on specific things and not try to diversify.
What do you mean by specific things?
So we're primarily an oil palm company, and we're also doing cassava. And on the livestock side, which is why we've diversified our income stream from a risk management perspective, we're doing cattle and pork. We could go into poultry, but we're not going to go into poultry because we're trying to have a narrow focus on the things we're doing. So I think it's develop expertise in certain spaces and work hard on deploying your expertise to optimize what you're doing. And I think there are very many sectors in the agribusiness space where different people could focus on. And I think the key is to try not to be all things to all men and just focus on areas of expertise, which is what we are doing.
But do you have fears, concerns? Some people say the issue of policy inconsistency, is a threat to expansion and embracing opportunities.
This is true. It's been a function of the Nigerian political environment for a very long time. With every new government, there's a new master plan in agriculture, there's a new master plan in gas, there's a new master plan in livestock. So yes, that's a very significant problem that the private sector faces in terms of what the government is doing from a policy perspective. But I think that it's important to understand that government only has a part to play in terms of regulating the private sector and creating the environment for the private sector to thrive. So if we could get to single-digit inflation rates, then people would raise equity, people would borrow money from banks, people would have a variety of ways to actually finance their businesses. So I think the government has to take care of the macro environment and the macro picture, inflation, and that affects how financial services, insurance, and other services engage with the private sector. So it's fairly complex, and I don't think it's as simple as just what is government policy and what are they doing.
What about the issue of insecurity? That has been pointed to as a major threat to the agricultural growth, agricultural sector growth.
Yes, this is true, but I don't think insecurity is a threat to just agriculture. Insecurity has been a threat from a social perspective to everything in the economy, and I think that's one thing that is primarily the business of government to solve, because I don't think the private sector can combat insecurity, and there are a variety of reasons for insecurity, and I mean that's a 2-hour conversation on social philosophy. But yes, I mean it has been a threat for us. It's been a risk for us. We've had to spend significant sums of money on just security on our farms, in engaging private security, in mobilizing all the police. So I think if we could cut those costs, if security improved in a general sense, that would be very helpful.
Can we place a number to the loss, even if it's to your company?
I think one could model it. It's not something that it immediately comes to mind, but it's certainly a significant number, and I think it would help greatly if we could remove that cost from our balance sheet.
And does technology help? So I don't know if you've listened to Minister Bosun Tijani of Digital Economy.
Yes.
He says he has a farm, he uses a lot of technology and all of that. Does that come into play in your case?
Yes, it does, but technology is an enabler for agribusiness. I mean, we use drones for mapping our farms, we use satellite technology to understand the soil systems and understand how we can more optimize agriculture. But you have to do the farming properly in the first place for technology to be an enabler in what you're doing.
It used to be the last number that I saw about post-harvest losses was placed at 50%. Has that changed? Are things better?
We'd have to talk to the National Bureau of Statistics to get a very accurate number, but I would imagine that it cannot be very different, because you need cold storage to be optimized across the farming sector in Nigeria. You need to fix roads, you need to fix infrastructure, and since the last numbers came out, I don't think there's been any significant improvement in the nature of infrastructure or investment in cold storage across Nigeria. So I don't have the numbers to hand, but I think the NBS would probably release those pretty soon. But I cannot imagine that it's improved in the short to medium term.
Does it seem difficult to attract investors to this storage and preservation, area or the parts of agriculture?
Well, I'm a farmer now. I used to be.
There are some discouraging factors, yeah. Because it's a business opportunity.
Yes, it is. I think access to capital is difficult. A lot of these things are capital intensive. It's difficult to borrow from a bank, and it's difficult for banks to lend if interest rates are high. And so I can understand the challenges there. The alternative to raising debt is to raise equity. And in raising equity, you need to have a compelling story for investors to come into. And then there needs to be liquidity in the markets, and it depends on what type of equity you're raising. Because we're listed on the Nigerian Stock Exchange, where we have access to public equity. But of course, that requires a significant amount of regulation. And I think there are a lot of regulatory hoops one needs to jump through. And that has a high cost in itself. So I think the major problem in terms of people trying to engage in business is access to capital. And I mean, that's a question for the financial sector.
Mm. And this agro-industrial segment, I mean, there are conversations that if Nigeria was able to add more value to its agro-products, crops, even the revenue and the growth in the agricultural sector will be more pronounced. You know, so we're not just, I know that the lawmakers have, I think it's at least 20% you're supposed to add before you export and all of that. But I mean, measuring the 20%, there's another conversation and all of that. But the issue of adding value to our crops, are we making progress on that front?
That's an interesting question. I mean, if you add value to crude oil, you'll have petrol and you'd be more profitable. But it took us 40 years to finally figure that out. So it's simple and straightforward ostensibly, but I think there are a lot of factors that affect value addition. And finance is one of them. And we've just discussed access to finance, which is difficult. But then you need to have the human capacity. If you don't understand processing, you can't process. So transfer of technology, human capacity, knowledge, expertise, and a lot of it is about human capacity and the knowledge to actually transform things. So when people say value addition, it's a nice phrase, but it's underneath it encompasses a lot of things that I think we have to take into cognizance before we understand, we think it can be made manifest in the economy.
You think we're too young or it's too soon? Because you did say, I mean, see how long it took us to refine our crude. Do we have to wait that long, you know, to also build on this value addition?
I don't think one can say too soon or too young, but there is a requirement for a level of knowledge, a level of capacity, and a level of education in order to achieve certain things.
You don't see intentionality in going through that path of knowledge and...
Well, intentionality means investing in the educational system. Intentionality means investing in schools, having a proper curriculum, not just having policies, but having the money to invest in the educational sector so you can grow people who understand what they're doing. And that's a difficult proposition if you don't have money in the economy in the first place. So I think it goes back to government policy. When you say intentionality, how serious is the government about the policies they bring forward? And if they bring forward, do they have the capacity to fund those policies? Because you can have all the policies in the world which are beautiful. If you don't have the capacity and the financing to fund those policies, then they're pretty much useless.
I know you're involved in the conversation about establishing staple crop processing zones. How's that going?
It's going well. I mean, we're focused right now on the acquisition, which we're trying to close. It takes us to a significant place in terms of the oil palm space in Nigeria. It gives us access to about 22,000 hectares of oil palm. 11,000 hectares is already planted and fruiting. So that is our focus at the present time. But in the medium to long term, we still want to go into that and scale up the business. And it's a function of where we get to in terms of our scale. But it is still part of our long-term strategic plan.
We hear the government, even states, talk a whole lot about trade, the free trade zones and all of that. Is that making any impact?
For us at the present time, no, but I know that there are a number of companies that are involved in that, and depending on the scale of a company, I think it can add a lot of value to what they're doing. I heard even getting on board, getting to those zones is really expensive. I mean, you just talked about getting on the NGX. That's how many steps you have to go through, you know. I heard also, you know, accessing to benefit some of those things, you have to be really big for you to be able to. Also a function of size, scale, and financing.
All right, thank you so much for your time, Mr. Chuka Modi, Managing Director and Chief Executive Officer of Ellah Lakes, and congratulations once again.
Thank you very much.
We'll be following your story, see what you do in the oil palm space as you grow bigger with this acquisition of Tolerable.
Thank you.
Let's take a break. When we come back, we'll head to the global space here on Business Morning. Please stay with us.